There's a paradox woven into the fabric of male desire that most women never discover. The moment you stop reaching for him, something shifts. Not gradually, not subtly, but viscerally, in his body, in his thoughts, in the restless space between sleep and waking. Psychologists studying attachment patterns have found something startling. Men don't become emotionally addicted to women who pursue them. They become addicted to women who withdraw, not coldly, not cruelly, but with calm, centered detachment. Here's what that looks like beneath the surface. When you stop texting first, his dopamine system starts hunting for the reward it once took for granted. When you stop asking where he is, his ego confronts a mirror it doesn't recognize. When you stop performing emotional labor, he suddenly feels the weight of absence. And absence, for the masculine psyche, is unbearable. Carl Jung wrote that we don't fall in love with people. We fall in love with the parts of ourselves we see reflected in them. But what happens when that reflection disappears? When the mirror goes dark? That's when obsession begins. Most women believe that love is built through closeness, consistency, presence. And in many ways, it is. But there's a hidden mechanism underneath, one that governs not just attraction, but emotional dependency. It's this: men fall in love with women they can't quite hold, not because they're chasing fantasy, but because detachment forces them to confront their own inner void, the part Jung called the shadow, the part they've been avoiding their entire lives. You become the gateway to that confrontation, and once a man sees his shadow reflected in your absence, he can't unsee it. He doesn't want you because you're perfect. He wants you because you've stopped needing him to be. This video will show you the psychological architecture behind that shift. You'll learn why detachment activates male obsession, why emotional independence becomes irresistible, and why the woman who withdraws her energy becomes the one he can't forget. But more than that, you'll understand what this means for you, not as manipulation, but as mastery. My name is Adrian Vale. For the past 17 years, I've studied human psychology through the lens of Carl Jung's philosophy. The shadow, the anima, projection, and the unconscious forces that shape how we love, attach, and long for one another. I've worked with hundreds of women navigating relationships that felt confusing, imbalanced, or emotionally draining, and I've spent just as much time understanding the male psyche, not to villainize it, but to decode it. Because once you understand the architecture of male emotion, everything changes. You stop taking behavior personally. You stop trying to convince, prove, or perform. You start moving through relationships with clarity, calm, and quiet power. Before we go further, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read them. And it reminds me that psychology is universal, but every woman's story is unique. Now here's what I want you to know. What I'm about to share in this video is not common knowledge. It's not something you'll hear in mainstream relationship advice. Most people talk about communication, vulnerability, showing up, and those things matter. But they miss the deeper truth. The truth Jung spent decades exploring. That attraction is not logical. It's archetypal. It operates in symbols, shadows, and projections. And the woman who understands this operates in a completely different reality than the one still chasing closure, validation, or emotional certainty. If you want to see love, desire, and relationships through the lens of philosophy and psychology, not pop culture or surface-level tactics, subscribe to this channel, because every video here is designed to give you clarity in the chaos. Not to game men, but to free yourself from the patterns that keep you stuck. Let's begin. Carl Jung believed that every man carries within him an unconscious image of the feminine, what he called the anima. This isn't about a specific woman. It's an archetype, a template, a psychological blueprint shaped by his mother, his culture, his wounds, and his deepest longings. When a man meets a woman who mirrors that anima, who activates that inner image, he falls. Hard. But here's the paradox Jung identified, and most people overlook. The anima is not attracted to what is fully known. It's drawn to mystery, to depth, to the unreachable, to the feminine that cannot be possessed. Nietzsche wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." Detachment is that flight. When you stop making yourself emotionally available on demand, when you stop adjusting your energy to soothe his uncertainty, when you stop living in reactive mode, you ascend. And from that height, you become mythological. Not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer collapsing yourself to fit his inner world. Think about it. Most women enter relationships by expanding their presence, texting more, being more available, offering more reassurance. They believe this builds intimacy, and sometimes it does. But for many men, it does the opposite. It collapses the mystery. It reduces the anima to the mundane. It transforms the woman from archetype into obligation. Detachment reverses this. When you withdraw, not out of spite but out of self-respect, you restore the mystery. You reignite the projection. You force him to confront the question, who is she when she's not trying to be mine? And that question haunts him. Schopenhauer argued that desire is rooted in lack, that we only want what we don't have, that satisfaction kills longing. He was right, but only partially, because detachment doesn't create lack through absence. It creates spaciousness. It gives a man room to feel his own emotion without your energy filling every corner. It lets him project, wonder, yearn, and, most dangerously for his ego, doubt whether he's enough. And doubt, in the male psyche, triggers pursuit, not because he's insecure, but because his unconscious is trying to resolve the tension between what he wants and what he cannot control. So here's the central question this video will answer. What happens psychologically when you stop chasing, fixing, or filling the emotional gaps, and instead become still? What does that do to him? And more importantly, what does it do to you? Let's start with neuroscience. The human brain is wired to seek reward, specifically dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with anticipation, pleasure, and motivation. When a man is in the early stages of attraction, every text you send, every smile, every moment of attention triggers a dopamine hit. His brain begins to associate you with reward. But here's what most women don't realize. The brain doesn't release dopamine for certainty. It releases dopamine for uncertainty with potential. That's why gambling is addictive. That's why intermittent reinforcement works. That's why the push-pull dynamic, when done unconsciously by someone avoidant, can feel so magnetic. It's not the person, it's the pattern. When you're consistently available, responsive, and emotionally present, his brain stops hunting. The dopamine system quiets. You become predictable, not boring, but expected. And the expected doesn't activate desire. It activates comfort. Comfort is beautiful. Comfort is necessary. But comfort alone doesn't create emotional addiction. Detachment reintroduces unpredictability. When you stop initiating contact, his brain notices. When you stop being emotionally reactive, his system recalibrates. When you stop organizing your schedule around his availability, something in him panics, subtly, unconsciously, because now he has to work for the dopamine hit that used to come effortlessly. And work, effort, investment. These are the foundations of value in the male psyche. Let me give you an example. A woman named Clara from Boston came to me after a 4-month relationship started to feel one-sided. She was always the one planning dates, initiating deep conversations, sending good morning texts. He was responsive, kind even, but passive. I asked her one question. What would happen if you stopped? She said, I'm afraid he'd forget about me. I said, then you'll have your answer, but I don't think that's what will happen. She stopped texting first, stopped asking about his day, stopped filling silences with reassurance. Within 3 days, he noticed. Within a week, he called her, not texted, called, and asked if something was wrong. She said calmly, "Nothing's wrong. I've just been focused on myself." That sentence rewired everything, because suddenly she wasn't a reflection of his needs. She was a woman with her own inner world, one he was no longer centered in. And that absence made him feel something he hadn't felt in months: hunger. Not for sex, not for validation, but for access. Access to her energy, her attention, her presence. The irony? She had been giving him all of that freely. But free access has no psychological value. Scarcity does. Not manufactured scarcity, not games, but the natural scarcity that comes when a woman remembers she has a life, a purpose, and an identity beyond being his emotional support system. That's when detachment becomes alchemy. That's when his dopamine system lights up, not because you're withholding love, but because you're no longer handing him certainty on a silver platter. And uncertainty, wrapped in self-respect, is intoxicating. Now let's go deeper, into the shadow. Jung believed that most of what we call love is actually projection. We see in others what we cannot see in ourselves. For men, this plays out in a very specific way. When a man is attracted to you, he's not just responding to who you are, he's responding to who he becomes when he's near you. You are a mirror. And in that mirror, he sees his idealized self, strong, desired, needed, capable. But when you detach, the mirror changes. Suddenly, he's forced to see something uncomfortable: his dependence. Not financial, not physical, emotional. He realizes that somewhere along the way, you became part of his identity, part of his emotional regulation, part of the structure that holds his ego in place. And when you step back, that structure wobbles. Most men won't articulate this. They'll say things like, "You seem distant," or "Are we okay?" or "You've been acting different." But what they're really saying is, "I don't recognize myself without your reflection." This is the masculine shadow. The part of him that fears being unseen, unneeded, or, worst of all, irrelevant. Detachment exposes that fear. Not cruelly, but truthfully. Consider this example. A woman named Amara from Nairobi was dating a man who constantly criticized her career choices, her friends, even the way she dressed. She thought it was about control. But when we explored it deeper, she realized he was projecting his own insecurity. He needed her to need his approval, because that approval gave him power, and power made him feel safe. When Amara stopped defending herself, when she stopped seeking his validation or trying to change his mind, something fascinating happened. He softened, not immediately, but gradually, because without her reaction, his projection had nowhere to land. He was left alone with his own inner critic, the voice he'd been externalizing onto her. And that confrontation, that psychological mirror, forced him to either grow or retreat. In Amara's case, he grew. He apologized. He asked what he'd be, and doing wrong. He admitted for the first time that he was afraid of losing her. But here's the key. She didn't detach to manipulate him into apologizing. She detached to protect her peace. And her peace became the boundary that his ego couldn't cross. That's the paradox. Detachment isn't about controlling his behavior. It's about refusing to absorb his projection. When you stop being the mirror he uses to avoid himself, one of two things happens. He either steps into self-awareness, into his own individuation process, as Jung would say, or he retreats, seeking another mirror that won't challenge him. Either way, you win, because you're no longer bound to his emotional avoidance. And the man who stays? He's not staying for the mirror. He's staying for the woman who had the strength to remove it. That's when emotional addiction begins. Not to your beauty, your kindness, or your availability, but to your refusal to disappear into his projection. So what does all of this mean for you? Not theoretically, practically. It means this: the moment you stop reacting, you start leading, not through dominance, not through control, but through presence. Let me explain. Most relationship dynamics are reactive. He pulls away, you chase. He's distant, you ask what's wrong. He's uncertain, you offer reassurance. None of this is wrong. It's human, it's care. But it's also positional. It places you in the role of responder, of stabilizer, of the one responsible for his emotional equilibrium. And that role, over time, becomes exhausting. Detachment flips the script. When you stop reacting to his moods, his silence, his uncertainty, you reclaim your center. You stop being a satellite orbiting his emotional state. You become the sun, and he begins to orbit you. Not because you've manipulated him, but because psychologically, people are drawn to those who are grounded in themselves. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole, independent of external validation. When you individuate, you stop needing him to make you feel safe, worthy, or loved. You already are those things. And that self-possession? It's the most attractive energy a woman can embody, because it's rare. Most people, men and women, are walking bundles of unmet needs, looking for someone else to fill them. But when you've done the inner work, when you've integrated your shadow, when you've learned to hold your own emotions without projecting them onto another person, you radiate something different. Not neediness, not performance, but calm authority. And men feel that. They may not have the language for it, but they feel it in their bodies, in their nervous systems, in the quiet hum of their unconscious. Here's the shift. Awareness is not manipulation, it's alignment. You're not detaching to punish him or to make him chase. You're detaching because you've realized that you cannot and should not be responsible for another person's emotional wholeness. That's his work, just as your work is yours. When you own that, the power dynamic transforms. You stop asking, "Does he love me?" You start asking, "Do I love who I am when I'm with him?" You stop wondering, "Is he going to text back?" You start wondering, "What do I want to create today?" This isn't cold. It's not avoidant. It's mature love. The kind Erich Fromm described as the care for the growth and development of the other, and of oneself. You cannot grow if you're constantly adapting to his emotional weather, and he cannot grow if you're always shielding him from his own discomfort. Detachment gives both of you room to feel, room to choose, room to show up, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine desire. And when he realizes that your presence is a choice, not a guarantee, that's when the addiction takes root, not to your need, but to your freedom, and to the version of himself he becomes when he's near it. Now let's pause. Because everything I've shared, the neuroscience, the Jungian insight, the power dynamics, can be misunderstood. And I need to be clear about something. Information is not invitation. Understanding how detachment affects male psychology doesn't mean you should weaponize it. Awareness is not the same as strategy. It's not about playing games, withholding affection, or pretending not to care when you do. That's manipulation. And manipulation always backfires, because it's rooted in fear, not truth. True detachment comes from self-respect, not self-protection. It's the natural byproduct of a woman who has decided that her energy is sacred, and that she will no longer give it away to people who don't honor it. That's the difference. You're not detaching at him. You're detaching for you, and that intention changes everything. Let me tell you about Sophia from Sao Paulo. She had been in a relationship with a man who was emotionally inconsistent, present one week, distant the next. She thought detachment meant ghosting him or acting unbothered when she wasn't. But when we worked together, I asked her, "Are you detaching because you're hurt, or because you're honoring yourself?" She went quiet. Then she said, "I think I'm detaching to hurt him back." That's the shadow side of detachment. It becomes retaliation, a power play, a way to make him feel what you've been feeling. And that's not mastery. That's woundedness in disguise. Real detachment requires emotional maturity. It requires you to say, I care about you, but I care about myself more. It requires boundaries, yes, space, yes, but not cruelty, not coldness. There's a grace to it, a softness. You're not abandoning him. You're simply refusing to abandon yourself. And here's the moral paradox. When you stop trying to control his feelings, you actually give him the freedom to feel them. You give him space to miss you, to realize what he's losing, to confront his own patterns without you rescuing him from the discomfort. That's respect, not just for him, but for the process. Jung believed that relationships are containers for individuation, that the friction, the longing, the projection, all of it serves a purpose. It forces us to grow, but only if we stop trying to manage the other person's journey. Your job is not to make him obsessed with you. Your job is to stay aligned with yourself and let the chips fall where they may. If he becomes more invested because of your detachment, beautiful. If he doesn't, that's information. Either way, you've honored your truth, and that, more than any psychological tactic, is what creates lasting attraction. Because a man can sense when you're centered. He can feel when you're whole. And that wholeness, that integration, is what makes you unforgettable. Not because you played the game better, but because you refuse to play it at all. Respect and consent matter, always. Your power is not in controlling him. It's in becoming unshakable within yourself. So here's what I want you to take with you. Detachment is not a strategy. It's a state of being. It's what happens when you stop outsourcing your peace to another person and start cultivating it within yourself. And when you do that, something shifts. Not just in him, in you. You stop tolerating breadcrumbs. You stop waiting for closure. You stop performing to be loved. You just exist, fully, freely, and that existence becomes magnetic, not because it's trying to be, but because it simply is. Here are 3 micro-actions you can take today. 1. Pause before you reach out. Before you text, call, or initiate, ask yourself, am I doing this from fullness or from lack? If it's lack, wait. Fill yourself first. Reclaim 1 hour for yourself. Not for productivity, for presence. Read, walk, sit in silence. Let your nervous system remember what it feels like to not be in reaction mode. Practice the phrase, I'm focused on myself right now, not as a weapon, as a truth. And when he asks why you're distant, when he senses a shift, own it calmly. No apology, no explanation, just honesty. That's all. Small shifts, deep impact. If this resonated with you, if you want more psychology, philosophy, and clarity in love, subscribe. Drop a comment below. Tell me what landed. Tell me what you're struggling with. I read every one, and remember, you are not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to understand yourself. Everything else is just noise. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video.